with regard to using this guideline, isn't it true that you really don't even have to talk to any of the parties that are involved in order for you to reach your opinion?
The title is Snow White, a Battered Woman, because it was catchy.
Right. So it does say is Snow White a battered woman, right? That is the title of it, correct?
It is.
In this case, for example, you talked about family of origin issues. Do you see that up there?
Yes.
And one of the things that you told us, well, you looked at the family origin of Mr. Alexander. Didn't you tell us that?
Yes.
Well, if we take a look to follow up on your Snow White issue that you presented, isn't it true that she had family of origin issues, didn't she?
The family of origin issues we're talking about here, Mr. Martinez, are the family of origin issues for the perpetrator.
Okay. So, in other words, in this case, you see Mr. Alexander as the perpetrator. You don't see him as the victim.
No.
Okay. So, in other words, in this case, you see Mr. Alexander as the perpetrator. You don't see him as the victim.
No.
And so it's...
Well, I see, I am looking at domestic violence. And in regard to domestic violence, I am seeing Mr. Alexander as the perpetrator. Yes.
And one of the things that we know about your presentation also is that, and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm, right?
Yes.
And in it, we have an individual, that's the king, right, who is married and has a kid, and they name her Snow White, right? Yes or no?
I'm not using the Brothers Grimm version. I'm using the Walt Disney cartoon. I just want to make that clear.
So there's different, all right? But it is true, though, that Snow White had a father, right?
Yes, she did.
And the father was the king, right?
Yes.
And it ends up that Snow White's mother ends up dying, right?
Yes.
And what ends up happening is that he remarries, right?
Yes.
And what ends up happening when he remarries is that he has somebody who is less than honorable, if you will, or savory with regard to her view of Snow White, correct?
Yes.
And so what happens during that situation is that there is a problem because this woman, the queen, begins to, if you will, abuse or be less than nice to Snow White, right?
Yes.
So what we have then is a situation where we have a father who has failed to protect, right? If we're looking at it from this global perspective, right?
Yes.
And so then, if we look at it that way, Snow White is sort of being, and I use the term loosely, abused. Not in the technical sense, but she's not being treated correctly, right?
She's being abused as a child, right?
That's correct. And one of the things that happens after that is that the father sends her away, correct? She goes into the forest, right?
Objection for relevance, going this far into the Snow White story?
Overruled.
Right?
She goes into the woods, correct.
And in fact, when she's out in the woods, there's neglect by the father, right?
Yes.
And the same thing with Snow White, right? She lived in a situation with less than ideal circumstances, right?
She lived with the Seven Dwarfs, and according to the Disney version, she was pretty happy.
Well, she lived in a shack, right?
I thought it was a cute little cottage, Mr. Martinez.
All right. But there's 7 dwarfs that she's living with, right? No one of her own age is there, right?
I don't know the age of the dwarfs.
Well,
I don't. I'm sorry, but I don't.
What I'm saying to you is it your opinion that there were other little kids that would play in the playground with her when she was living with the 7 dwarfs?
Objection, relevance, argumentative.
Overruled. You may continue.
Would you repeat the question, please?
Is it your understanding that there were other little kids to play with Snow White out near the shack?
Near the cottage, no.
In fact, she was just there cooking and cleaning, right?
Well, she was talking to the birds and singing with the animals.
And cooking and cleaning for the dwarves, right?
Correct.
And then with regard to Snow White, one of the things that we know is that something bad happens to her, right? The incident with the apple, right?
Yes.
Somebody comes and harms her, right? And
Yes.
with regard to Snow White, we know that she ends up going unconscious, as we would talk about it in this day and age, right?
Correct.
And basically what's going on with her is that she's waiting around, right? For Prince Charming, right? Or somebody, right?
She's waiting around
Well, she's not going anywhere, right?
when she's unconscious?
Right,
Well, when she's unconscious, she's lying around unconscious.
right. And then we have the kiss, or whatever happens, and Snow White awakens, right?
Correct.
And she starts to live with Prince Charming, right?
Yes.
And if we start talking about this issue involving the balance of power, in that particular situation, Snow White has no power, right?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
Right?
Well, she's a queen. I'm not sure what kind of power she has.
The king has the power, doesn't he?
Objection, foundation. Relevance, foundation, speculation.
Overruled.
Right?
Well, the king, yes, has more power.
Right. And so if, for example, Snow White, in this relationship, if we're talking about the balance of power, in that case, she doesn't have much power, right?
Objection, speculation, judgment may approach.
You may approach.
Mr. Martinez, are you angry at me?
Ma'am, is that relevant to you? Is that important to you?
Ladies and gentlemen, please refrain from laughing in the courtroom.